Welcome to Issues That Matter. My guests today are my dear friends Scott Ritter and Diane Sare. And Scott and Diane are going to be talking about Van Cliburn and the importance of what he did in the late 50s. So, Scott, you brought up Van Cliburn's name a few conversations back, and I had a book on my Nook about Van Cliburn called Moscow Nights. So I pulled it out, I read it, and it just blew me away. It was fantastic. Um, he did wonderful things for kind of like a detente between the Soviet Union and the United States, and I believe it was a missed opportunity. So, Scott, what are your thoughts?
Well, I wouldn't call it a missed opportunity because it happened. What he did is real. It's part of history. He, was a very, I guess, courageous man. Let's just go back in time and try. I was born in 1961, so I can't go back too far. But
Well, let me stop you right there. The reason I said missed opportunity, that it was not it didn't progress into something, where there was a peace between America and the Soviet Union.
I
It
disagree. I disagree wholeheartedly. Full
Okay, go on. I'm
scale,
sorry. Go on.
100% disagreement. Van
Okay.
Cliburn actually put in motion things that led to a tremendous outreach between the United States and the Soviet Union. What brought it to an end was a bullet that killed John F. Kennedy in Dealey Plaza in 1963. What brought it to an end was the fact that Kennedy's death then put Khrushchev in a very difficult situation at home, unable to continue to pursue, the opportunity for peace with the United States that led to his removal from power at the hands of Brezhnev and others in I think 1964. So no, what Van Cliburn did is break us free of the Cold War McCarthy era garbage about Russia and the Red Menace. What he did is humanize, the Soviet people. He went to Moscow and he participated in the first Tchaikovsky Music Festival, a big deal. I'm what the Russians call a Nikolternik, very uncultured person. I um, I specialize in football, beer, being a Marine, firefighting, things like that. My idea of culture is an ice cold Sam Adams on a summer night. But having said that, I appreciate culture. I recognize it when I see it. And the Russians, when you travel to Russia, when you have the opportunity to do this, or just meet Russians, I'm all over the place, but Anatoly Antonov is the Russian ambassador to the United States, and I've had the honor and privilege and pleasure of meeting him several times. And you know, the first thing that comes to mind when you meet the ambassador Antonov is the word culture. This is a cultured individual. Um, he invited me to a lunch in his residence, and the thing he was most proud of were the paintings that hung there. I mean, it was like being in an art museum. This is a time when we have bad relations between our countries. I was invited because he wanted to talk about arms control and things of that nature. But the very first thing that he does is show me the art and talk about how much art means to him. Um, and it's not fake. I mean, I'm pretty good at sussing out fake people. I did that for a living, and for a long time, cutting through lies, through interrogations and investigations, etc. This guy was as genuine as the day is long. So genuine that I was immediately, felt almost defensive because, like I told you, I'm a cold beer on a hot summer night kind of guy, and I'm now being walked through the history of Russian art, and it was a wonderful moment. But the same thing everywhere I went in Russia. Um, the Russians, the first thing, Novosibirsk, the third largest city in Russia, um, thriving economy. I mean, if you're going to be bragging about Novosibirsk today, you're going to be pointing to the skyline and saying, look at all those cranes, look at all the construction, look at the people in the hotels, the different nationalities coming here to Novosibirsk to make this the booming place it is. Nope. Got to go to the largest opera house in Russia, built under the time of Stalin during World War II. An opera house built during a life and death struggle with Nazi Germany. But culture is so important to the Russian people, to the Russian soul, that they had to build this opera house. And it's not just any opera house, ladies and gentlemen. It's the opera house. It is big. It is beautiful. It is magnificent. And they are so proud of this. The citizens of Novosibirsk are so proud of this. And everywhere you go, it's the same thing. St. Petersburg, where the stones scream out, with the, having ingested the blood of so many millions of people from the suffering of the city. And yet it's the art galleries that people point to. It's the architecture. It's that, the fact that this was, Peter the Great's city laid out by the man himself. The same thing in Moscow. So, all I can say is that the Russians are all about culture. They appreciate culture. They appreciate music. And music to them is defined by people like Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky. Now, we in America might know him from the Nutcracker Suite, or people might be familiar with his work in terms of Swan Lake and things like that. But the 1812 Overture, that was my favorite as a kid because the cannons go boom. But I say this sort of again, guys. I'm just telling you, cold beer, summer night. So when I speak of Tchaikovsky, I speak of it as a absolute dilettante. I mean, I am as shallow as the thinnest pond out there on a evening's rain. It's just there's no depth to me. I'd like to be deeper, but I'm not ignorant, and I understand how much it means to them, and so I listen to it. So when you hear Tchaikovsky, I worked in Vodkinsk. And I didn't realize until I got to Vodkinsk, that's Tchaikovsky's birthplace. And, here's this city known for a whole bunch of cool stuff, but their pride is the Tchaikovsky Museum. And I went there as an inspector, and I went when I visited before, and how proud they are of him and what he's done for Russia. He, in many ways, is one of the things that defines Russia. When you think, Pushkin in terms of literature, Tolstoy. I mean, we can go on the writers, Dostoevsky, Lermontov, we can all day long, but the same thing with the great composers, and Tchaikovsky's name's right there at the top. And so to have the Tchaikovsky Music Festival, this is a big, big deal. This is like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, heading off and saying, we're going to make this about the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, man. It's there. Bruce Springsteen, the biggest name. Tchaikovsky is the big name. And so this is a big deal. And this young, precocious Texan. I mean, come on, man. If we're going to send somebody to Russia to represent us in the Tchaikovsky Music Festival, it's got to be some blue-blooded snob from Harvard or from Yale or from the East Coast, maybe some California transplant coming out of Stanford or something. This boy comes from Texas, and he rolls into Moscow, and he takes him by storm. Takes him absolutely by storm. His interpretation of music, because sheet music. Diane can get into this later on because I know nothing about sheet music except it's a bunch of weird things that my daughter sits down at the piano and she turns it into lovely music. But sheet music is sheet music. It doesn't tell you in there how to pour your soul into it, how to pour your heart into it, what the appropriate time for that little pause or the inflection with the foot, something that adds something to it that only an artist can get. This boy rocks into Moscow, takes over their music, and blows the minds of the Russian audience. And this is These aren't cold beer on a summer night people. These are people who are imbued with culture. They are sitting there. This is the, and it's a big deal to play their music in front of them, because as much as they appreciate you coming over and trying, they will call you out if you aren't good enough. And he sat there and he played, and they are crying, they're up in the air, they are applauding. And he's an American during the height of the Cold War. And we're talking about McCarthyism, the Red Scare. And as much as we feared them, they feared us. They didn't know anything about us. They were just going, who is this boy? He came. And so Khrushchev is watching this. And the Shostakovich is a famous Russian composer, and he's the judge, the head judge, and he's counting the votes, and he's scared to death because, damn it, if the Texas boy didn't win. And so he goes up to Khrushchev and said, "We got a problem here, boss." He said, "What's the problem?" He said, "Van Cliburn got the votes. He's number one." And Khrushchev said, "Well, did he earn it?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Give it to him. He won it." Van Cliburn won the Tchaikovsky Music Festival. He was the star of the show. He came back in the history of the Avenue of Heroes in New York City, where we have put politicians, we have put astronauts, we have put heroes. Only one musician has been given that honor, and it's Van Cliburn. He came back to a hero's welcome, and he started this process of cultural exchange. And this is why I said that it wasn't a missed opportunity. Dizzy Gillespie went over there and played to him. Dizzy Gillespie's a jazz musician, and for the communists, Dizzy Gillespie was Satan personified. I mean, he's playing the evil devil's music, man, and he's up there, he's playing it, and they loved him. They ate him up. He wouldn't have gone to the Soviet Union if it weren't for Van Cliburn. Leonard Bernstein is a famous composer. He went over there, and he wouldn't have gone if it weren't for Van Cliburn. We opened up this cultural exchange. It began a process that between Kennedy and Khrushchev. Van Cliburn went over there during the Eisenhower years. Sputnik. Again, I wasn't alive, but I read about it. Apparently, a little thing going around the space, going ding, 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 scared the hell out of Americans. We were there during he was the bomber gap, where the Russians apparently had more bombers than us, but we didn't. So we built a whole bunch of bombers. The missile gap, where the Russians apparently had more missiles than us, but they didn't, but we built a lot of missiles because we didn't trust them. We feared them. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 almost terminated life on this planet. Big old nuclear war was averted. And Khrushchev and Kennedy said, we can't let this happen again. And Kennedy gave that wonderful speech at the American University in June of 1963, where he talked about the need to walk in their shoes. That while we can have policy differences with the Russians, with the Soviets, we need to understand that they have a perspective too, and that we have to comprehend that perspective by walking in their shoes. Van Cliburn walked in their shoes. He played their music to them. He interpreted their music. He began this process of cultural exchange, and it would have succeeded, Cynthia. It would have succeeded had John F. Kennedy not been murdered, because Kennedy and Khrushchev, if Kennedy had won a second term, and it's likely he would have, we would be living in a completely different world today, because Khrushchev and Kennedy had both taken huge gambles to make sure that 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis, never happened again. But one of the things that empowered Kennedy is the fact that Khrushchev was open to these cultural exchanges. Khrushchev was somebody who believed in competition, meaning that he wasn't afraid of the Americans. He was willing to bring them in and learn from them, and he wanted to work with the Americans, et cetera. I'm not saying it would all have been bed and roses. I'm not saying that there wouldn't have been problems with capitalism and communism. Who knows? But what I am saying is that Van Cliburn was not a missed opportunity. Van Cliburn came at a perfect moment in U.S.-Soviet relations, and he started something that had a chance. It succeeded, and it would have gone on further. You can't call yourself a failure if that what you initiated led to interaction between the leaders of two nations trying to move us in a direction. An assassin's bullet ended that, but Van Cliburn is the guy who started it.
Diane?
Well, I think this point about President Kennedy is extremely important. And also, he had a great appreciation for the arts. He asked Robert Frost to be present and recite a poem at his first inaugural address. He brought Pablo Casals and Marian Anderson into the White House. And he also, even just shortly after the Cuban Missile Crisis, was proposing a joint mission to the moon. Many people are not aware of this, but Kennedy delivered a speech at the United Nations saying that the moon landing should be a joint effort between the United States and the Soviet Union. So that's absolutely right. I would say a couple things about Van Cliburn. One, this musical question, which Scott brings up, but it's in poetry as well, right? A written word doesn't tell you anything about the inflection or the emotion, or you have to have an understanding of the language. You have to have an idea in your mind about where it's going. Apparently, Van Cliburn, as a child, was made to sing everything that he played. And I just can't stress how important this is in terms of musicality, because music, just as the written language was developed after the spoken language, the written music, the notation was developed after the actual music of people. And our first instrument is the voice. So this is very, very important. Also, people think of culture as being something outside of politics, but I actually think it's the ultimate form of politics, because if you're going to have relations with other people, then what you want to find are domains of universality. The little things might be different: our language, our religion, what we look like, what we eat for breakfast or don't eat breakfast, or how we pray, or all kinds of things like that. But what you discover are there's certain universal conceptions of beauty. And you take a Tchaikovsky piano concerto. Does someone have to speak Russian to understand it? Do you have to speak a particular language to hear the language coming across in the music? Or does someone have to be, quote unquote, cultured beyond beer at a football game to appreciate when someone is actually pouring their heart into a performance? No, because it's universal. I will also say about Russia, because we're coming up on this and the singing, Beethoven's probably the greatest choral work ever written was Beethoven's Missa Solemnis. And the choir that I founded in Manhattan did it. We happened to start it during COVID, which was insane because you couldn't hear what anybody sounded like. And I must say, I became very amazed about our chorus, because everyone was sending in their practice tracks, and you heard, I hope none of them are listening to this, actually, how bad all of us are pretty bad singers. I mean, I'm not a professional singer. So you'd hear the individual singing and you'd say, oh my gosh. But when it came together, it was absolutely incredibly beautiful and powerful, which is also a sign of Beethoven's greatness. It's also fiendishly difficult. The range for the bass singers goes to the depths, the very lowest notes of their voice, and then goes up on the same part to notes that would normally be sung by a high tenor. And every voice part in the Missa Solemnis has that. It is really difficult, and everyone says, we're never going to do it. You can't do it with an amateur course. Well, it turns out Beethoven's sponsor of this piece was a Russian prince, Golitsyn, and there was a chorus in St. Petersburg. For various reasons, there was an exchange with the people working on Italian bel canto, and you had some of the absolutely most phenomenal vocal music going on in Russia, including in the church. People know those Russian basses, the bass that's an extra octave below. So Beethoven actually wrote in a letter that the chorus in St. Petersburg was way beyond anything anywhere else in Europe. So he was writing his Missa Solemnis for this extraordinary chorus, and it was premiered in St. Petersburg in April of 2024. We're coming on the 200-year anniversary of it. I had hoped that the United States would not be so insane, that we could have a collaboration reminiscent of the Van Cliburn breakthrough with American choruses joining with Russian choruses and orchestras to celebrate the 200-year anniversary of this incredible work. But I think it's a crucial domain, and I think it sometimes sneaks up on people. That is, they don't realize how powerful it is, how universal this question of music is, how much it communicates without words, and how you can discover that there's much more that unites human beings than actually divides us. The things that unite us are much more profound than the things that divide us, but how do you get access to them? So I think it's just a beautiful example. And also the fact that people in New York were so happy about it. They weren't unhappy that he won this award. They were happy about it, which I think also indicates a certain quality that can be tapped into if we can move into something more beautiful.
Scott? Scott?
Oh,
He's having problems with Scott.
there
Can
he
you
is.
My internet is apparently unstable. Thank you, FBI.
Sounds like a certain president I know, but anyway.
But let me say a couple things. One, Diane, why can't you go to Russia? Why can't your course go to Russia? U.S. government can't stop you. And if you want the appropriate contact in Russia that can make this happen, if it's something you think you could pull off, I'll be more than happy to provide you with that. But there's no sanctioning culture. There's no sanctioning. There's not a ban on travel. You can't travel there directly. We don't allow that here in the United States. But you can go to Russia if you want to. And if you have a chorus that wants to participate in such an amazing event, I'm certain there'd be people willing to at least entertain the idea in Russia. But if it's something you're interested in, maybe later I'll reach out and send that to you. But I just can't think of a better thing to do and a more courageous thing to do at this point in time. We need to start overcoming the tyranny of ignorance. The Russophobic madness that has gripped this country about everything dealing with Russia. And while the U.S. government may stop Russians from coming here because we are indeed governed by some of the worst people possible, and unfortunately, many of the people seeking office in 2024 on the other party are just as bad. So it's not as though this is a Democratic problem, or a Republican problem. It's an American problem. It's a problem of American ignorance. It's a problem of America's susceptibility to the fear-induced phobia that says everything about Russia is somehow inherently evil. And it's going to become even more difficult in the near future as Russia starts to openly prevail on the battlefield in Ukraine, as Russia's victory becomes more and more a certainty in the minds of Americans. We can no longer allow ourselves to buy into the fantasy that we've been sold about the Ukrainian victory and Russian defeat. Russia has won, is winning, will win, and we have to deal with it. And unfortunately, we don't tend to deal with these things in an intelligently in an intelligent manner. What we do is we become bitter we lash out. And so there, I think that we're in for even worse times ahead in the near future between the U.S. and Russia, as the United States becomes embarrassed by the scope and scale of our failure in Ukraine. But that doesn't mean that we should put the ambassadorship of the people on pause. We have a duty and responsibility as Americans, because I always remind people that the government works for us. We don't work for the government. And so rather than waiting for the government to tell us what to do and how to behave and what to think, we should tell the government how we think, how we're going to behave, and what we want done, and then do it, as long as we're not breaking any laws. So yeah, I think it's imperative that we do this, and this is why I draw upon the Van Cliburn precedent. I was invited to go to Russia back in May, and I will be honest and say that there was no small amount of trepidation on my part to go on that trip, because of the very things we're talking about. You know, you don't necessarily want to turn yourself into the ball that's teed up, to be hit by the bat. And by going to Russia, especially in a high profile manner, you're basically turning yourself into the punching bag that all the Russophobic people are going to be hitting. And yet it had to be done. And one of the reasons it had to be done is because I said that we all need to be our own Van Cliburn. We have to channel our inner Van Cliburn. We may not be as talented as Van Cliburn. You are, I'm not. But we each have our own talents in different ways, our different skill sets. But more importantly, we're human beings. And the most important thing about the Russians is they're human beings as well. And this human to human connectivity is so important. It's so critical. And so I felt that I had to take advantage of this opportunity. And, I've been around for a while, and I've done a lot of, cool things that I think are, that will go down in history as playing a major role in shaping world events. I'd like to believe that this trip to Russia is right up there. The trip that I took was right up there amongst them, because I think that it wasn't just personally rewarding to me. I'll let the Russians speak for themselves, but I think it was very rewarding for the Russians as well to be able to interact with an American on a human level, and for them to realize at this time when the media portrays Americans as being gripped with this anti-Russian emotion, that there are Americans out there who are willing to work through this and reach out to them as human beings, and treat them with the respect that every human should be accorded. So that's the reason why, the real reason why I appreciate Van Cliburn. I appreciate his music, but I can't claim to be, I think he played Rachmaninoff to win the Tchaikovsky Festival, and I can't sit here and say that I'm a student of that composer or of classical music in general. I'm not. But what I can say is that the emotion that he generated by playing that song the way he did to win over the crowd, that genuine human interaction, is something I did experience in Russia. Maybe not on the scope and scale of the Tchaikovsky Music Festival, but everywhere I went, I felt as though the Russians were giving me the same courtesy, the same respect, the same dignity that they gave Van Cliburn, because he dared cross the ocean, go to their country, and treat them with respect. And I did the same thing. And I encourage every American out there, if you have the ability to be your own Van Cliburn, to channel your own inner Van Cliburn, and to go forth and meet with the Russians. If you can go to Russia, that would be great. If you can't, they're here. They live here. Treat them with respect. I'm not saying you have to hang the Russian flag outside your house and paint your car with a Z or do any of that nonsense. No, I'm not even saying you have to agree with the policies of the Russian government. Of course not. Of course not. Nobody's trying to tell you what to think. But the Russian people deserve to be treated as humans. Just like the Ukrainian people deserve to be treated as humans, just like any people and all people deserve to be treated as humans. And right now in this country, they're not. They're treated as second-class citizens. And we have to change this because Russia will be a part of the world going forward, a major part of the world going forward. When you think of BRICS, this growing, expanding international economic forum, the R is for Russia, ladies and gentlemen. Russia's there. It ain't going away. It's not going to become BICS. It's going to be BRICS forever. And so the best way to deal with Russia is to understand Russia. I always tell people that, when I first started learning about Russia, it was during the Cold War when I was training to go to war against them. So I didn't do it because I wanted to hug them to death. I did it because I wanted to shove a bayonet in their chest. But the best way for me to prepare for that was to know them, to learn them, to study them so that I could understand them. And once I did understand them and I had the chance to meet them, I realized the last thing I wanted to do was jam a bayonet in their chest. And the thing I really wanted to do was hug them because they're good people. They're great people. They're wonderful people. It's a wonderful culture. And we need to do everything we can to create this kind of connectivity. And that's why every American owes a debt of gratitude to Van Cliburn for his for his pioneering spirit, for being the guy that had the courage to go forth and do it.
So, Diane, it's coming up on 11:45, and I know you have to go. So, what's going on in your life? How's your campaign going?
It's very challenging, and there's enormous openness. I mean, I'm sorry to say there's, putting it mildly, a vacuum of leadership. So people are very open to what I have to say. The question is getting around the censorship and the difficulty in funding, all of those things that are a result of the outrageous propaganda machine we're all up against. That's the challenge. Music is going to play an important role in my campaign. I have some young people around. We formed a campaign chorus. We are bringing music to the rallies against the genocide being perpetrated in Gaza right now. I'm actually very heartened to see so many young people in the streets. I think we suffer because the education system is horrific. I was thinking, just as Scott was speaking, that one of the reasons why I think we're so violent is there's no music in the schools anymore. It's been eliminated. Music and art are considered not necessary. So where you'd find your love of mankind or your outlet for certain profound emotions has been taken away from people. So my biggest concern is a lack of vision. That is, what is peace? Is peace merely the absence of war? Or is it the right of people to actually develop their talent and to use their talent to benefit other people? Isn't that what makes people actually happy? How do you construct a world where that occurs? And I think the dynamic that we see with the BRICS process, which I think China's Belt and Road Initiative now is engaged in something like over 20,000 major infrastructure projects in 165 nations. That's huge. What does that bring to a young person? What do they think their future is going to be if they know that they're suddenly going to be having trains that go 500 miles an hour or whatever in their country, cities that have clean drinking water, unlike lead-infested water that we have in the cities of the United States. So that's I guess you can, if running for office, you could say, well, it's a great thing that there's really no competition, but I don't think that's a good thing. So that's the fight. That's the fight.
So even though you're running for Senate in New York State, people from all over the country can, donate to your campaign or be part of your campaign. So if anybody wants to reach out to you, how could they do so?
My website is sareforsenate.com, and that's SARE, sareforsenate.com. Yeah, and I definitely don't want to drop my Mrs. Solemnis idea, so we'll be talking about that after, because I think these things are really important. I'm not sure we can find the singers up to that. Is the most impossible piece of it. Is really hard. So if Scott will sing in the chorus, then we'll be sure. We'll take it up.
So, Scott, what's going on in your world?
Well, I'm definitely not training to sing in any chorus, and there's a good reason why. Um, this this voice would sink the Titanic. But the no, I continue to move forward with the initiative that I began back in May to try and you know, wage peace. That's what I'm trying to do. Wage peace. Making a documentary film about that. We're talking about this right now, but Van Cliburn. I don't want to give away too much, but Van Cliburn, the Van Cliburn story will factor into the final, the final sequencing of the film. But it's when you begin something, it becomes a living thing. It needs to be, you need to keep adding new stuff to it. So I'll be going back to Russia at the end of December to continue. There's hopefully some music collaborations that can happen that will be relevant to the movie. Continue to do some interviews and material for the movie. And the idea again is, to wage peace, to continue this process of outreach with the Russians in a way that can manifest itself in something good. When I first started this project on the arms control, I was trying to, revive the spirit of the INF Treaty, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. I wrote a book, Disarm at the Time of Perestroika. That's why I went to Russia, because the Russians translated that book, and I did a book tour. But in talking with the Russians there and talking with them since then, I think the spirit of the INF Treaty can't be revived. Unfortunately, that's where we're at right now. And maybe this is a good thing, because there's so much resentment, so much bitterness in Russia towards the United States and how we've treated arms control and abused arms control, ruined arms control, destroyed arms control, that the last thing the Russians want to do is try and breathe life into this moribund body. They don't respect America. They don't trust America. They don't want to continue that relationship, a relationship that, was born in the Cold War, reached its the peak of its viability at the end of the Cold War, only to be destroyed by the United States in the post-Cold War environment. So the Russians right now are talking about the need for a completely with something new. And actually, this creates new opportunities, new challenges, because I don't have to worry about re-educating the American people about Cold War legacy. Now we can just start new, afresh. How would you like to see arms control? How would you like to, how do you view nuclear weapons? And I'm still confident that, and I take solace in the fact that, look what happened with Gaza and the cause of Palestine. How many hundreds of thousands of people came into the streets? Millions when you take them across the country and the world. I had begun to question whether or not, the issue of disarmament and nuclear weapons could generate enough excitement amongst the American people to get that many people in the streets advocating for a new disarmament reality, a new disarmament relationship. But after seeing the outpour of support for the Palestinian people, and I'm more optimistic now than ever before that we can capture the imagination of the American people with this just cause. and maybe by reimagining it in a way that's acceptable to the Russians, because it takes two to tango. You can't have disarmament if the Russians aren't willing to sit down at the table anymore with you, because your government has been lying to them for the last 40 years. Maybe the American people can help create this movement to redefine what arms control means to us collectively, and then we can imprint that on our government so they best represent our ideas and translate them into policy. But that's where I'm at right now. I'm moving in that direction.
Are you still considering doing that that get together in Central Park?
Well, I am. Uh, that's what I was talking to you about. I had become a little bit I mean, again, to all the peace movement people out there, it's your fault. You guys aren't doing anything. You're not doing a damn thing. You know, you fight amongst each other. You can't get together. You're competing against one another, and as a result, nothing happens. The peace movement had nothing to do with what happened with the demonstrations with Palestine. That was spontaneous movement by people who came out because of a great injustice that's being done. So I'm frankly speaking I'm just tempted to jettison the peace movement, because they don't exist. They don't stand for anything, and just appeal directly to the American people and say, if you guys want a future, if you want tomorrow, if you want to live, this is your cause. But to try and work it through the various peace movements, man, that's like herding cats, and I'm not in the cat herding business.
So if somebody wants to contribute to your movie, how could they do so?
The best way is to go to scottritterextra.com, the website. On there, there's a tab, wagingpeace.fund, and you can contribute directly to the movie. We're making good progress. Like I said, I'm really excited. Diane knows this about the importance of music. Really excited about some of the music that we might be creating as a part of this movie. So yeah, that's the best way to do it.
So you've been listening to Diane Sare and Scott Ritter. I'm Cynthia Pooler. This is Issues That Matter. If you like this show, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. And most importantly, I just created a new website called Digital Cynthia. So everybody listening, why don't you take a little peek at my new website? And there's something in there that you can email me. Let me know what you think. Scott, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Diane, also, have a great day. And thank you, everybody, for listening.